Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.
Look at all this ornate, advanced steampunk machinery. Surely if you have access to all of this, then the trip would be shorter than 80 days. Or was the novel so forward thinking that it was steampunk as well? These modes of transportation are essentially most of what encompasses the visuals of the game. Black and white with slight movement, and some audio. Oh, that's what the sea sounds like. Other than that, cities have their own 2D designs, and at markets, the items that can aid you on your journey are displayed as hand-drawn, more colorful pictures. And lastly, there's the 3D globe that charts your progress. It's kind of plain and austere, but I suppose that's a necessity in order to clearly display the Indiana Jones moving line. All of these things add a little something, but the main focus is on the story. And also the gameplay. As alluded to, I've never read Around the World in 80 Days, so I don't know how closely the game mirrors the book. But I'm assuming not much, because there's a great deal of story and text that can only be read after making certain choices, if you take the route going through that city. I doubt all of this was in the book, but the story is good, at the very least compared to the massive amount of choices you can make. It feels like an adventure. Every route has different characters you can meet, other available hijinks, but I suppose if you were to sequentially arrange all of the text into a traditional novel, the story probably wouldn't come across that great. But altogether in this package it is quite lovely. The beauty of the countryside is described. Characters are analyzed and some choices hinder you. Some buy you time, others end comically. And some choices, perhaps indicating that I was a bit harsh about the quality, lead to dark, honest moments. Some choices allow you to roleplay what type of valet you want to be. Are you a man of honor? A rogue? A charlatan? Yeah, that's about as good as my accent work gets. It delves into the history of that time. Sort of. More a version of it. It's steampunk after all. But beyond that, they do go into some dark areas. The Confederacy, war, juxtaposed against some people's feeling of optimism regarding the recent rapid technological advancement. You know, the kind of characters that would say, what a time to be alive and all that. So to finally land upon it, the story is good. And since the story is probably the meat of this game, that's a major weight lifted. And since this is a visual novel with fairly sedate visual elements, maybe that opens this game up to deserving a more literary critique. Which isn't my specialist subject. Oh when will people realize and appreciate my brilliance based off my knowledge of Cartoon Network shows? Oh yeah, in this game you play as Passepartout, the world's most versatile valet. One moment you have him beating the world boxing champion, another organizing a mutiny on a submarine. As said, a rousing fun adventure. Time never stops, so every second has to be used wisely. You travel and end up at your destination. You scout out for transportation leaving shortly, assessing which route is the best under the circumstances. Sometimes you'll guess if you're tight for time, maybe bribe an official or two to secure another train, while bearing in mind that different forms of transportation have different levels of comfort. Your employer, Mr. Fogg, has a particular distaste for driving. It doesn't agree with his sitting organ. But sometimes poor planning gives you little choice. Most transportation costs money, and you must budget, to avoid you running out of money and having to beg, literally. Another option is visiting a city's market, buying an item that can make an astronomical profit in specific cities. In my third attempt, I essentially just followed the money. If there was profit to be made and we were still going east, we went that way. At least until I'd accrued enough money that I could afford the most luxurious, speedy and direct routes possible. And I made it with a few days to spare. But I suppose other strategies are available, such as using items that will make your journey easier, some climates more comfortable, automatically discover certain routes, so that you don't have to waste time in cities exploring. I didn't find the game particularly difficult, but I did find it satisfying. reaching the end, winning the wager. And while you don't have to play this way, I enjoyed being a traveling salesperson. I think I actually made more money selling things than Fogg actually wins through the wager. But fair warning, none of this has voiceover. There is a whole bunch of reading to do, but perhaps unsurprisingly so, it is a visual novel. A very novelly visual novel. To finally get a completed successful run took me about 6 hours in total. 3 attempts, 1 was successful, the other 2 I believe I ended early, because there I was in rather bad spots. Wanted to redo things properly, with newfound wisdom. So it's not very long, unless if you find this game interesting enough that you would replay it, taking different routes. And I certainly wouldn't begrudge you doing that. I mean, I played it fairly close to the equator, so there's an argument to be had that it would be worthwhile going fully north or fully south, and experience more of the story, dialogue and fun to be had, squeezing a few more hours out of it. On Steam it's fairly cheap, 95 Rand full price, 38 Rand on sale. That's 6 Rand 34 per hour of gameplay, which isn't great, but I suppose it's okay, especially if you believe you'll be able to get more time out of this game than I did. And if you want more flexibility with your choices here, it is available on the App Store for about $5, and on Google Play if you have Play Pass. Size-wise, it isn't that bad. It only takes up 1065 megabytes on the hard drive, just barely what I'd consider small. But some may argue it's bad when you compare it with the short length. And it does work on the Warhorse, and stereotypically I think it's okay for kids. You don't visually see any of the things happening, but there are vivid descriptions of some dark things, such as colonial occupation, war, torture, other things too. And you may prefer to keep your children away from this on those grounds, but others may not. It encourages reading, and while it is an alternate timeline, and certain historical events are skewed, I'm guessing the worst they do here is at most pull 1 or 2 punches. If that. Otherwise, I believe they depict things accurately, at least conceptually and maybe emotionally. But in all fairness, as mentioned, there's a great deal of content I did not get to read. So maybe there's something objectionable left there? But really, some kids can handle it. The game has a good story with many branching paths, decisions, and routes. The game has a good atmosphere. It feels like you're on this race, taking on this wager, as though you're a part of the adventure. And I believe mostly to blame for that is the very good audio design. A train chugging along is a surprisingly good way to activate your imagination. It has good satisfying gameplay. It's fun to make a good choice. It's fun to turn a profit, or just make good time, checking the metaphorical pocket watch. On the maybe side, the visuals are quite sparse and clean. The only flash really comes from the steampunk designs, and you can't even see most of them because they're black and white silhouettes. And as mentioned, the story is the meat of this game. There is a lot of reading, but surely it's to be expected from this visual novel. I actually don't believe there are any real cons to this game. It just really more depends whether or not you like visual novels. If you really must have a con, maybe the available strategy of following the money is a bit too easy. Come on, play this game and be the ultimate valet, shaving Fogg without incident or cut, while on this jostling behemoth. No, your majesty. That skin-tight spymaster's uniform won't scare the court at all. And no, you definitely don't look like Sam Fisher. In this game you play as Queen Elodie, 1 year away from her coronation. And you have a lot to learn before then. The kingdom needs a good statesperson, as well as for their ruler to actually survive until their coronation. So choose what you want to learn. Maybe you want courtly manners, in order to please the nobles, milady. Or at the very least, not insult them. Perhaps learn to tap into your magical potential, to protect your kingdom from lumen-related threats. Maybe learn to dance. Sure, compared to the other two, that sounds like a lower priority. But sometimes it helps. In fact, most skills have their uses. But due to the physical limitations of this world, you can only learn so much a week. Pick your priorities carefully, because a jack of all trades is a queen to no one. Unless this isn't your first playthrough, and you have a bit more inside knowledge. Learning history can give you precedents for decisions, but intrigue can help you uncover plots and schemes. Divination warns you of threats of the future, and reflexes help you dodge some of those threats. Some skills are commonly used and others fairly rarely. I don't think I used ciphering once in my playthrough. But you can't just learn whatever you want because you're still a person, with their own emotions, and some emotional states are more beneficial for learning certain subjects, and hinder others. So much so that at times it becomes impossible to learn a certain subject. So you also need to steer your emotional state to where it needs to be for your desired skills, by choosing activities to do on the weekends. But sometimes the decisions you make affect your mood, heavy as the crown, so sometimes you need to be able to pivot and learn something else. Even if it's not in the order you wanted to learn it. It is such a satisfying jolt when you succeed in a skill check. And you get what you want. Defeating an enemy. Or gaining the love of the people. And not dying's nice too. And there are quite a few ways that can happen. I'm sure some of you would like this doily in their house. Your first playthrough will be great. Perhaps like me, you will constantly save and load in order to get the perfect sequence of events that you want. Everything's still fresh, so failure isn't as deflating then. But once you try a second playthrough, that approach no longer works. Because it becomes a bit of a grind. You already know of quite a few possible things that can happen to you. Having to repeatedly see them again is a bit much. I mean, the point of this replay was to try something different this time. But I just can't seem to tear myself away from these skills. But going on this course, I know I will fail a lot of checks. So it can be a bit annoying when you're trying to experiment in a way that makes the gameplay new and fresh, but that doesn't lead to failure. But in the second playthrough, a new sort of joy develops. I thought I was done with the game. But when I tested it on the warhorse, I got sucked in again. I chose to focus on a different set of skills and committed to not taking it too seriously. And somehow, in a somewhat different way, I actually managed to survive to the end. I believe in like under an hour. Much shorter than my original playthrough. I knew which pieces of dialogue I could skip because I already read them. And I just read the new bits. It was fun again. Quite a pleasant little surprise. A second playthrough can be quite worthwhile, as long as you try and suppress the more controlling aspects of your nature. Visually, the game is not impressive. Hand-drawn anime styling, a couple of backgrounds, some of them seem to have a 3D effect. No animations for the most part, just text. I suppose the characters are well designed, in that they do look unique, and help visualize the members of the court, some of whom can be your enemies. Although I do suppose that some of them can look a bit stereotypically smarmy. Just look at this utter cad. Scheming dukes and eager suitors. So nothing about the game is inherently groundbreaking. But there's an intricacy of the history, intrigues, power structures of the kingdom and neighboring kingdoms. And how that pertains to your choices and strategy is great. Pieces of history and intrigue you know make other options available. Combine that with the characters you're dealing with and their personalities and motives, as well as your designs, it actually feels like you're in charge of a country with a complex political system. Political ponage. Excuse me if ponage is rather Vera Chappelle. The descriptions associated with the training you receive contribute to this. There's one every 10 levels of a subject. A tidbit of what you've just learned. They can be quite entertaining and often directly refer to particular skill checks, such as learning that arrow removal requires you to cut out the arrow and not push it through. And level 80 in courtly manners teaches you how to politely decline an invitation. And let me tell you, that skill is surprisingly important, life or death even. The gameplay is really absorbing. It's essentially just time management, choices and skill checks. But it's fun if you enjoy reading a lot. Your love of reading and love of this game will probably be intertwined. The game is quite short, I completed my first playthrough in about 7 hours, and my second playthrough within 1. I was honestly disappointed that there wasn't more game to play. I started feeling like I could take on the world. Spoiler alert, but I didn't know that the game ends at the coronation, so to my mind it was cut short. But hey, what a problem to have. This game's so good I wish there was more of it. It is cheap on Steam, 109 Rand full price, 38 Rand 15 cents on sale. That's 5 Rand 45 per hour of gameplay. Once again, not great, but okay. Especially if you can squeeze more hours out of it. Just like 80 days. But it's a ridiculously easy download. It only takes up 58 megabytes on the hard drive. And it works on the Warhorse. And stereotypically, I suppose it's okay for kids. Violence is mildly described. Poisonings and the like. A doily with an impalement. But there was one blue moment. I suppose it was sort of subtle. The game has fun, simple gameplay. It's involved and absorbing. It has intricate story-related information and world-building. Politics, foreign relations, magical history, skills gained. It really does elevate the gameplay. There is replay value as well, because you can choose to be other types of Queen Elodie. More militaristic, more diplomatic, and polite. But just remember, a second playthrough will probably only be worthwhile if you're capable of taking it less seriously. If you can't, it can get a bit painful. On the maybe side, the game is kind of story-focused. Love text to read because there's no vocals, yet it's kind of light in the story front as well. At least in that it focuses a bit more on gameplay than a visual novel usually does. Compared to the text. Sure, 80 Days had a fun gameplay component, but it also had mountains of text. This game, not as much. On the con side, it is quite difficult to try a different gameplay route. It can be a faff, trying new things, while still avoiding things you know won't work. But, as mentioned, taking things a bit less seriously can be a nice salve for this. And the visuals are a bit bland and unimpressive. But maybe it's a bit unfair of me to call them bad. Maybe some of you will prefer calling it serviceable. Come on, play it. You'll be immortalized on a doily. It's really hard to imagine why someone would kill her. She was barefoot. She was obviously a queen of the people.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.